When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart. The evening lights of Los Angeles painted the sky in soft gold and orange when Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage. It was a quiet event, not one of those loud Hollywood shows filled with flashes and applause. It was something deeper, an interview about life, loss, and love. People came not for glamour, but for truth. And Keanu, known for his calm voice and honest words, was ready to speak. The interviewer asked softly, "Keanu, you've played so many roles, from a warrior to a lover, but what does love mean to you personally?" Keanu paused for a long time. His fingers rested together, his eyes looking at the ground. There was a silence in the room, a kind of stillness that made everyone lean forward. Then he spoke, slowly, gently. "Love," he said, "is when you see someone's soul before you see their face." A soft murmur ran through the audience. People felt something shift. Keanu wasn't performing. He was remembering. He wasn't talking about a movie. He was talking about Sandra Bullock. He didn't say her name, but everyone knew. Their story had begun years ago, on a set where laughter was constant and friendship was effortless. But what grew between them wasn't simple. It wasn't romantic in the usual way. It was quiet, almost sacred. They had been two people who understood loneliness without needing to explain it. That night on stage, Keanu looked lost in that memory. "Sometimes," he continued, "you meet someone who never leaves you, even when they're far away." He gave a small smile, the kind that hides pain. "You don't forget the moments that were never planned. You just carry them quietly." The audience clapped softly, touched by the honesty. The interviewer moved to another topic, but Keanu's mind didn't. Behind his calm eyes, memories replayed and of laughter, of late-night talks, of a simple coffee shared between scenes, and of unspoken words that time never allowed to bloom. After the event ended, Keanu walked outside into the night. The city buzzed around him, cars passing, people rushing, yet he felt alone in the middle of it all. He pulled his jacket tighter, not because of the cold, but because of the emptiness that came after speaking truth aloud. He sat in his car, staring at the road. He had faced tragedy before. He had seen love and loss. But there was something unfinished about Sandra, something that lingered like music after the song ends. That night, Sandra Bullock sat miles away in her home, scrolling through her phone. She saw a clip from Keanu's talk, the exact moment he said those words. She stopped breathing for a second. She knew that look in his eyes. She knew he wasn't acting. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the video. Once, twice, then again. She could hear the honesty in his tone, the same honesty that once comforted her on hard days. Back when they were filming together, she remembered one day when everything had gone wrong. The camera broke, a scene failed, and she felt like quitting. Keanu had walked up quietly, handed her a coffee, and said, "Take a break. The world will wait." That was Keanu. Never loud, never demanding. Just there, in the most human way. Now, years later, his voice still had that same warmth. It reached her like it had crossed time. She sat on her couch whispering, "You still remember?" But she didn't text him. She didn't call. Fame teaches you silence. Not every emotion needs to be seen. Yet that night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She opened an old wooden box in her drawer and found a folded note, something Keanu had once written on the set of their movie Speed. It said, "Thank you for seeing me when the world only saw a role." She smiled through tears. The note was small, but it meant everything. As the clock ticked past midnight, Sandra opened her laptop and started typing. Not a message, not a script, just a letter. Something she had wanted to say for years, but never did. "Dear Keanu," she typed, "I watched what you said about love tonight. You always had a way with truth. I don't know if you meant me, but if you did, I want you to know. I never forgot either." She stopped typing there. She didn't send it. She just saved it as a draft and closed her eyes. The next morning, the world woke up talking about Keanu's quote on love. It went viral. Fans shared it everywhere, calling it the most beautiful thing Keanu ever said. But for two people, Keanu and Sandra, it wasn't just beautiful. It was personal. 3 days later, Sandra received a message from an unknown number. It simply said, "Some words don't fade, even when whispered years ago." Her heart skipped a beat. Only one person could write something like that. It was Keanu. She stared at the message, unsure what to reply. Her mind flooded with emotions, confusion, joy, fear. After all these years, what could she possibly say? She typed, "Then maybe it's time we stop whispering," and pressed send. The message went through. A minute later, her phone buzzed again. "Coffee?" he wrote. She smiled. That simple word carried the weight of everything unsaid. But what neither of them knew was that this coffee would lead to something unexpected. Something that would test not just love, but forgiveness, timing, and the meaning of connection after years of silence. And when they met again, the truth waiting between them would change both of their lives forever. When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart. The next morning, the sun rose gently over Los Angeles, painting everything in gold. Sandra Bullock stood by her kitchen window, holding her cup of coffee, lost in thought. She kept glancing at her phone on the table. No new messages, only that one last text from Keanu. Coffee? It had been 12 years since they last met in person. 12 years of growing, changing, surviving, and pretending to move on. Yet now, one simple word had brought everything back. Sandra took a deep breath and typed a reply. Same place? It was a risky message. Years ago, when they were still close, they had a small cafe they used to visit after long shoots. It was quiet, tucked away behind old trees where no one bothered them. Keanu always ordered black coffee, no sugar. She always added too much cream. Somehow that difference became a joke between them. You're calm and dark. I'm messy and sweet. Her phone buzzed seconds later. Same place. 4 p.m.? Sandra's heart raced. She wasn't sure if it was excitement or fear. Maybe both. The day felt longer than usual. She tried reading scripts, answering emails, cleaning, anything to distract herself. But every few minutes, her mind drifted back to Keanu's voice, his quiet smile, and those words. Love is when you see someone's soul before you see their face. By 3 p.m., she was ready. She kept her look simple. A white shirt, blue jeans, no makeup. She didn't want to look like a star today. She just wanted to look real. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves sat alone on his motorcycle outside the cafe. He had arrived early, as always. He didn't like making people wait. But truthfully, he was the one who couldn't wait. His hands rested on the helmet in his lap, his eyes staring at the door he hadn't seen her walk through in years. And then, it happened. Sandra stepped out of her car, the sunlight catching her hair just right. For a moment, she looked exactly as he remembered, calm, graceful, and a little bit unsure. Their eyes met, and time paused. There were no words, no cameras, just silence filled with history. Keanu stood up, a small smile breaking through his nervousness. "You're late," he said softly. "No," she smiled back. "You're just early." "As always," they both laughed. It was the same old rhythm. Easy, natural, comforting. They walked inside and found a corner table. The smell of roasted beans, soft jazz music, and the sound of distant rain filled the space. "So," Sandra said after a moment, "you still drink it black?" "Always," Keanu replied. "And you still add half the milk in the cafe?" She smiled. Some things don't change. They both grew quiet. The years between them suddenly felt heavy. Keanu looked down, then met her eyes again. "I didn't know if you'd reply," he said. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me again." "Honestly," she whispered, "I wasn't sure either." Keanu nodded slowly. "But you came." "Yeah," she said softly. "Because some words don't fade, remember?" He looked up, his eyes gentle but filled with emotion. "I remember everything. Their coffees arrived." Steam rose between them like a thin curtain, and for a few minutes, they just sat in silence. Outside, the rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the window. A sound that somehow made everything feel more intimate. Finally, Sandra spoke. "I watched that interview," she said quietly. "What you said about love, it was beautiful. But it also hurt. Keanu looked at her carefully. Why did it hurt? Because, she said, voice trembling, it reminded me of how much I ran away from it. From you. His hand froze around the cup. He didn't speak, afraid that one wrong word might break the moment. She continued. You were always there, in the background, calm, patient, kind. And I was the one who moved on too fast, pretending that friendship was enough. But it wasn't, was it? Keanu shook his head slowly. No, it wasn't. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to smile. You know, the world saw us as co-stars, but you saw me as a person, and that scared me, because I didn't know how to handle being truly seen. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. You didn't owe me anything, Sandra. What we had, it was real, even if it wasn't forever. She looked at him for a long moment. Do you still believe that? After all these years? He smiled faintly. More than ever, a quiet tear rolled down her cheek. You always make it sound easy. It's not easy, he said gently. It's just honest. Their eyes met again. No masks, no fame, no fear. Just two souls who once stood at the edge of something beautiful and walked away too soon. Then Keanu did something unexpected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, slightly yellowed. I found this in one of my old books, he said. You wrote it. She frowned, confused. He unfolded it and handed it to her. It was a small note, written in her handwriting from years ago. Thank you for teaching me how to be quiet in a world that never stops talking. Sandra gasped softly. You kept it? I keep what matters, he said simply. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She traced her fingers over the paper, her heart heavy with nostalgia. You really never let go, did you? Keanu shook his head. Letting go isn't always healing. Sometimes holding on quietly is. Outside, the rain grew heavier. People hurried past the windows, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers. But inside, the world had slowed down for them. Finally, Sandra whispered, You said love is when you see someone's soul before their face. Did you mean me? Keanu hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it aloud would make it real again. He looked at her gently. Yes, I did. Sandra closed her eyes, her breath catching in her chest. The truth was simple, but it hit like a storm, and for the first time in years, she didn't hide from it. But before she could say anything, Keanu's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and his face changed. She could tell something was wrong. He stood up slowly, his voice low. I'm sorry, I have to go. Is everything okay? She asked quickly. I don't know, he said softly. But I'll call you. He walked out into the rain, leaving her sitting there, confused, anxious, and suddenly afraid that she had just found him again, only to lose him once more. She watched through the window as his motorcycle disappeared into the distance, the sound fading like a heartbeat slowing down. Sandra sat back, staring at the empty seat across from her. She whispered to herself, Don't disappear again, Keanu. But deep down, she knew something had shifted, something that would soon reveal a side of Keanu's life she never knew existed. When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart. The rain didn't stop that evening. It fell in soft waves against the glass, blurring the city lights outside Sandra's car window. She sat still in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, but her mind was far away. She couldn't shake the look on Keanu's face when his phone rang. It wasn't surprise, and it was worry. Deep, quiet worry. She had seen that look before, years ago, when tragedy had touched his life. Sandra knew that behind Keanu's calm smile, there were scars he never showed the world. Pain he carried without words. She wanted to reach out, but she didn't know how. They had just found their way back to each other, and now something had pulled him away again. She sighed softly and drove home. Hours passed. The rain stopped. The night grew silent. Then at 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was a text. Sorry I left. Emergency with someone close. I'll explain soon. She read it again and again. Someone close? The words stayed with her. She typed a quick reply. Take care. I'm here if you need anything. But there was no answer. The next morning, Keanu sat in a small hospital room. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly, the air thick with disinfectant. A woman in her late 60s lay on the bed, her breathing steady but weak. Her name was Nora, a woman who had once been his mother's best friend, and one of the few people who had looked after him when life had fallen apart. She wasn't family by blood, but to Keanu, she was all he had left of the warmth that once made his world feel safe. Nora smiled faintly when she saw him. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came," he said gently, pulling a chair closer. "How are you feeling?" "Like the wind," she said with a weak laugh. "Sometimes strong, sometimes not at all." Keanu tried to smile back, but his eyes betrayed his pain. She noticed. "Don't look at me like that," she said softly. "I've had a long life, and I'm proud of you, Keanu. Proud of the man you've become." He reached for her hand. "I'm proud because of you. You taught me how to keep going when things fall apart." Nora squeezed his fingers weakly. "Then promise me something. Anything," he whispered. "Don't keep living alone in silence," she said. "You've given your heart to the world, but you've forgotten to give it to someone who can hold it." Keanu's throat tightened. "Some things are complicated. They don't have to be," she whispered. "You think too much, my boy. Sometimes love doesn't need answers. It just needs courage." Keanu blinked back tears. "I don't know if I have that courage anymore." "Then find it again," she said, her eyes glistening. Before it's too late, her hand slowly loosened in his. She was drifting to sleep, her breathing soft. Keanu sat there for a long time, watching her, remembering every small kindness she had given him. And for the first time in years, he felt a tear roll freely down his cheek. Later that night, Sandra received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. "Hello? Miss Bullock?" A calm voice replied. "This is Dr. Ellis from St. Mary's Hospital. Mr. Reeves listed you as an emergency contact." Her heart dropped. "What, is he okay?" "He's fine physically," the doctor said quickly, "but he's been here with a patient for over 20 hours. He refuses to leave. I think he could use some company." Sandra didn't think twice. She grabbed her jacket, her car keys, and drove straight into the night. When she reached the hospital, the hallways were quiet. She followed the directions the nurse gave her and found Keanu sitting by a bed, his head resting on his folded arms. He looked exhausted but peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after tears. Sandra stepped closer quietly. "Keanu?" He looked up slowly. His eyes were red, tired. But when he saw her, a faint smile appeared. "You came?" "Of course," she said softly. "The doctor called." He nodded. "This is Nora," he said, gesturing to the sleeping woman. "She's someone who raised me when my mom couldn't. She's been sick for a while." Sandra looked at the woman with gentle eyes. "She looks kind." "She is," he said quietly. "She always believed in small kindness, even when life was cruel." Sandra placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You've carried that kindness too. I can see it in everything you do." He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Sometimes it feels like kindness hurts." She nodded. "Because you never expect it to end." He stared at the window for a while. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Sandra's heart skipped. "With us?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah," she sat beside him. "I do. Sometimes too much." "Me too," he said. "But I also think maybe it wasn't supposed to happen back then." "Why not?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't ready to be loved. Not the way you deserved." Sandra's eyes filled with quiet sadness. "And now?" He turned to face her. "Now I'm not sure I deserve it." She shook her head gently. "Don't say that. No one deserves love, and they earn it by being real. And you've always been real." Keanu's eyes softened. "You really think so?" "I know so," she said. There was silence again, but it wasn't heavy. It was calm, like a pause between heartbeats. Then suddenly Nora stirred. Her hand reached out weakly and she whispered something. Keanu leaned in closer. "What is it?" Nora smiled faintly. "She's beautiful," she murmured, her eyes glancing at Sandra. "Don't lose this one, Keanu." He smiled, tears gathering. "I'll try, Nora." No, she whispered. Don't try, do. Those were her last words before her eyes slowly closed again, this time for good. Keanu froze. His hand trembled as he felt her fingers loosen completely. A quiet alarm sounded and a nurse rushed in. Sandra stepped back, tears in her eyes, watching as they covered Nora gently with a white sheet. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of loss. Keanu stood still for a long moment. Then he turned toward Sandra, his voice breaking. She's gone. Sandra stepped forward and hugged him, not out of pity but out of understanding. He didn't cry loudly, didn't scream. He just held on to her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not romance, not comfort, something deeper. Two hearts remembering how to breathe again. After a long while, Keanu whispered, "She always wanted me to find peace." "Maybe," Sandra said softly. "Peace found you tonight, even in loss." Keanu looked at her, and for the first time, his smile reached his eyes. But as they walked out of the hospital together, Sandra didn't know that Nora had left behind a letter. One meant only for her, and when she read it later, it would reveal something that would change everything between her and Keanu. When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart. The next morning was quiet. Soft light filtered through the hospital blinds, painting thin golden lines across the floor. Sandra sat on a bench outside the room, holding a small white envelope. A nurse had handed it to her gently a few minutes ago. "Mrs. Nora left this for you," the nurse had said. "She asked us to give it to you if you ever came." Sandra had been too surprised to ask questions. She didn't even know Nora personally, but somehow Nora had known about her. Now, she stared at the envelope in her lap, the edges slightly creased, her name written in delicate handwriting. "To Sandra." She hesitated for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The ink was a little faded, but the words were clear. "Dear Sandra, if you are reading this, it means I have already left this world. But my heart wanted to leave you something behind. You don't know me, but I know you through Keanu. He used to talk about you when he thought no one was listening. Not like a man talks about a lost love, but like someone talks about the light that made the darkness bearable. He carries so much silence inside him. Not because he is empty, but because the world took too much from him too soon. He loved deeply once, and when that love was taken, he built walls around his heart. But then you came, and something in him softened again. He never told you, but you brought peace back into his eyes. I saw it the first time he mentioned your name. I know fame can make real feelings disappear, but please don't let it happen this time. If you ever find your way back to him, don't walk away again. Not because he needs saving, but because he deserves to be understood. The world already has Keanu Reeves, the actor. He just needs someone to remember Keanu the man. With kindness, Nora." When Sandra finished reading, her hands were shaking. She pressed the letter against her chest, feeling her heartbeat quicken. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't even try to hide. Nora had seen something she herself had run away from for years, the truth of what Keanu meant to her. She took a deep breath, folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her bag. She stood up and walked back toward the hospital room. Keanu was sitting near the window, staring out quietly at the gray sky. There was a calmness in his face now, the kind that comes after long pain. He looked up when she entered, offering a small smile. "Hey," he said softly. "You didn't have to stay?" "I wanted to," she replied. "Nora, she left something for me." His eyes widened slightly. "For you?" "Yes," Sandra said, walking closer. "She wrote me a letter." "What did she say?" he asked. Sandra hesitated, then smiled gently. "She talked about you, about how much you've given, how much you've carried." Keanu looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. "She always saw through me?" "She also said something else," Sandra continued softly. She said, "Don't walk away again." Keanu's eyes slowly met hers. Something in them flickered, and surprise, emotion, fear. "She said that?" "Yes," Sandra whispered. "And I think she's right." He exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. You know, when I lost my family, I told myself I'd never let anyone get close again. It felt safer that way. But lately, he stopped for a second, his voice breaking. Lately, I'm not so sure. Sandra took a seat beside him. You don't have to be sure right now. You just have to be honest. He turned toward her, his eyes filled with quiet sadness. I don't want to hurt again. You won't, she said gently. Not if we stop pretending that love is supposed to be perfect. Keanu smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, she said. But it's real. For a while, they sat there just listening to the hum of the hospital around them. Neither spoke. The silence felt peaceful, like a moment of rest after years of noise. Then Keanu broke it with a question. Do you ever regret it? What? She asked softly. That we never tried, he said. Back then, Sandra looked down at her hands. Every day, he nodded slowly. Me too, she smiled through her tears. Then maybe this time we don't let timing win. Keanu's eyes softened. What if it's too late? Then let's be late together, she said. He chuckled quietly, that quiet, genuine laugh that reached his eyes for the first time in years. You always knew how to make broken things sound beautiful. Maybe that's because I'm broken too, she said. He looked at her, truly looked, and in that gaze was years of pain, love, and quiet understanding. A few hours later, after Nora's belongings were collected, a nurse came to hand Keanu a small wooden box. She wanted you to have this, the nurse said. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a small silver pendant, simple, shaped like a heart, engraved with tiny words on the back. Love always finds the quiet ones. Keanu stared at it, his fingers brushing over the words. Sandra leaned closer, whispering, She really loved you. He nodded, and she understood me better than I did myself. Maybe she understood both of us, Sandra said softly. Keanu placed the pendant in his pocket, then looked at her. Will you stay for a while? I'll stay, she said with a small smile. For as long as you need, he smiled faintly. Then maybe we start again, not as who we were, but as who we are now. I'd like that, she whispered. They left the hospital together that evening, walking into the golden sunset. Neither spoke much, they didn't need to. Their silence said everything. But as they drove away, neither of them knew that the media had already picked up photos of them leaving the hospital together. By morning, headlines would explode. Keanu and Sandra reunited? Old flames or new beginnings? The world was about to watch what was meant to be private, and it would test everything they had just started to rebuild. When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart the next morning. The world woke up buzzing. The internet was flooded with photos of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock leaving St. Mary's Hospital together. There were headlines, tweets, and clips all over the news. Old love rekindled? Keanu and Sandra's emotional reunion. Are Hollywood's most humble stars in love again? But for Keanu and Sandra, it wasn't about love stories or gossip. It was about something fragile, something real that didn't belong to headlines. Still, they couldn't escape it. By the time Sandra opened her phone, hundreds of notifications had already appeared. She scrolled through the pictures, grainy but powerful. Keanu walking beside her, the soft look on his face, her hand slightly touching his arm. It looked like something out of a movie. Her phone buzzed. It was Keanu. Don't check the news. Too late. She typed back. It's everywhere. His reply came seconds later. Let's meet. Somewhere quiet. An hour later, they met in a small cabin just outside the city. One Keanu used when he needed to disappear from the world. It was surrounded by trees, sunlight streaming through the leaves, and a lake that shimmered in the distance. When Sandra arrived, he was sitting outside on the wooden steps, drinking coffee from an old mug. He looked calm, but there was a heaviness in his eyes. You okay? She asked softly. He gave a small smile. Depends on what headline you read, she laughed gently. They never change. He looked at her, serious now. But this time it's different. They're not just talking about a rumor. They're talking about us. Then let them, she said quietly. We've spent our lives hiding our hearts behind roles. Maybe it's time to just live." He nodded slowly. "You really think the world will let us?" She sat down beside him, their shoulders touching. "Maybe not. But I think we can let ourselves." There was a long silence. Birds chirped nearby. The breeze carried the smell of pine and earth. For a while, it felt peaceful, like they had escaped the noise completely. "I used to come here a lot," Keanu said softly, when everything got too loud. "When I needed to remember who I was before the fame." "And who was that?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly. "A quiet kid who believed love could heal anything." "You still believe that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm starting to again," she smiled. "Then maybe I came here for the same reason." He turned to her. "You mean to remember who you were?" "No," she said, looking at him. "To remember who we were. Together." Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, there was no hesitation between them. Keanu reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You look different," he said softly. "But somehow exactly the same. That's because time changes faces." "Not hearts," she whispered. They both smiled, the kind of quiet smile that felt like home. But peace never lasts long when the world is watching. That evening, Sandra's manager called. She didn't want to answer, but she knew she had to. "Sandra, this is bad," the voice said on the other end. "The tabloids are making up stories. They're saying you and Keanu staged this for publicity." "Publicity?" Sandra's voice cracked. "Are they serious?" "Dead serious," the manager said. "They're twisting everything. Even Nora's story. Some reporter found out about her and claimed it's part of a shared charity narrative." Sandra's chest tightened. "They're turning kindness into a headline." "You need to stay low," her manager said. "Don't make any statements. No interviews, nothing." When she hung up, she sat quietly, staring at the floor, anger mixed with sadness. It wasn't fair. Not to Keanu, not to Nora's memory, not to what they were trying to rebuild. A few minutes later, Keanu stepped out from the other room. "You look upset." "They're saying awful things," she said softly. "About you, about us, about Nora." He didn't look surprised. "They always do." "But it's cruel," she said, her voice trembling. "They're trying to make something honest look fake." He sat beside her, placing a hand gently on hers. "Let them talk." "Truth doesn't need defending." She looked at him, her eyes wet. "How do you stay so calm?" "Because I've already learned what really matters," he said quietly. "And it's not what the world says about you. It's who you are when no one's watching." She leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "I wish I had your strength." He smiled faintly. "You've always had it. You just forgot." The next day, without telling anyone, Keanu did something unexpected. He went live, not on a red carpet, not for a promotion, but on a small online charity stream. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice calm, his words slow and heartfelt. "Sometimes," he said, "people forget that not every story is made for fame. Some stories are just about being human, about showing up for someone when they need you most. That's what Nora taught me, and that's what I hope the world remembers." His sincerity broke through the noise. Within minutes, social media began to change. Fans started posting messages like, "This is why we love Keanu. Real love isn't for cameras. Let them be." When Sandra saw it, she smiled, not because the rumors stopped, but because he reminded her what truth sounded like. That evening, she called him. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But some things are worth saying out loud." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank Nora. She's still teaching us." They both fell silent again, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then Sandra whispered, "Keanu, can I tell you something?" "Anything. I think I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" he asked. "To stop running from something real." He smiled softly. "Then let's walk toward it, one step at a time." The next week, they met again. This time not in secret, not in fear, but openly. They walked through a small park at dusk, hand in hand, laughing quietly as children played nearby. A few people recognized them, but no one interrupted. It felt almost normal, like two old souls who had found peace. As they sat on a bench watching the sunset, Sandra said, "Funny, isn't it? All the years we lost, all the silence between us, and somehow it still feels like we never left." Keanu looked at her gently. "Maybe love never really leaves. It just waits for us to be ready," she smiled. "And maybe we finally are," he nodded. "Maybe this time we don't let the world decide our story." But just as life began to feel steady again, something unexpected arrived. A letter in the mail, addressed to Keanu with no return address. The handwriting was old, careful, familiar. Inside was a single line. "The past you buried still breathes." He froze. He read it again. And again. Sandra looked at him, her voice soft but worried. "What does it mean?" Keanu didn't answer. His eyes darkened, and for the first time since they reunited, the calm in his face disappeared completely. When Keanu spoke about love, Sandra's reply melted his heart. The letter lay on the table between them. Its single line burned through the silence like a whisper that refused to fade. "The past you buried still breathes." Keanu stared at it for a long time. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but recognition. He knew that handwriting. Sandra watched him quietly, afraid to break the moment. "Keanu," she said softly, "who sent this?" He looked up, his eyes heavy with emotion. "I think I know." He stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange. His reflection looked older, tired, like a man facing a ghost. "Years ago," he began slowly, "before everything changed, I made a promise to someone. A promise I couldn't keep." Sandra waited, her heart pounding. He took a deep breath. Her name was Claire. "We were supposed to start a small foundation together to help children who lost their parents. We had everything planned, but the night before we launched it, she died in a car accident, and I never finished what we started." Sandra's voice was barely a whisper. "You think this letter is about her?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I've spent years trying to move on, pretending I wasn't running from that night." He turned to her. "When I said love is when you see someone's soul before their face. I learned that from her, but I only understood it because of you." Sandra stood up, walking closer. "Maybe this letter isn't meant to scare you. Maybe it's a reminder that what you buried isn't guilt. It's purpose." He looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "Purpose?" "Yes," she said softly. "You built your life helping others. But maybe there's one thing left undone. Something you need to finish. For her, for yourself." He nodded slowly. "The foundation. Then do it," she said. Do it the way she wanted. And this time, don't do it alone." His eyes softened. "You'd help me?" "I wouldn't just help," she said with a small smile. "I'd stand beside you." 2 weeks later, in a quiet hall in downtown Los Angeles, Keanu and Sandra stood before a small crowd. Journalists, friends, and children from local charities filled the room. Behind them, a banner read, "The Claire Reeves Foundation for Hope." It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it was real, built from the same honesty that had once defined their friendship. Keanu stepped up to the microphone, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't a comeback story," he said. "It's a continuation. Because love, when it's true, doesn't end with goodbye. It becomes what you do next." The audience listened silently, every word hanging in the air. He paused, then smiled slightly. "I used to think love was something you lose, but now I understand. It's something you carry forward, and sometimes life gives you a second chance to do it right." His eyes drifted to Sandra, who smiled softly from her seat. She knew those words weren't just for the audience. They were for her, too. When the speech ended, applause filled the room. Keanu stepped down, and Sandra met him halfway. They didn't say anything, just hugged quietly, the kind of hug that felt like peace. That evening, they sat by the same lake near the cabin. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm and endless. Sandra broke the silence. "So what happens now?" Keanu smiled faintly. We stop running, we live. We build something together. Not for fame, not for the world, just for us. She looked at him softly. You really think it's that simple? No, he said with a laugh. But maybe that's what makes it worth it. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, years ago I used to wonder why timing never worked for us. But maybe the truth is it wasn't supposed to, not until now. Maybe, he whispered. Because now we understand what love really means, Sandra smiled. And what's that? Keanu looked out at the water, his voice low. It's when two people stop trying to fix each other's past and start building each other's tomorrow. A soft wind blew across the lake, rippling the surface like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Sandra noticed it and smiled. Make a wish, she whispered. Keanu looked at her, his eyes full of quiet light. I already have. They stayed like that for a long time. Two souls who had walked through pain, through distance, through silence, and somehow found their way back. A few months later, the foundation flourished. Children found homes, schools were rebuilt, and kindness began to ripple far beyond what either of them expected. The world called it the Love Project, but for Keanu and Sandra, it was never about labels. It was about gratitude, for second chances, for forgiveness, and for love that outlasted time. In one interview months later, a reporter asked Keanu, "Do you believe in love after everything you've been through?" He smiled, thoughtful as always. I believe love never dies, he said softly. It just waits, until you're brave enough to find it again. Sandra watched that interview from their shared home, a faint smile on her lips. She knew he wasn't talking to the world. He was talking to her. She picked up her phone and texted him. You always know what to say. His reply came instantly. Only because you taught me. She laughed softly, looking out at the sunset, golden, endless, peaceful, and just like that, the story that began with silence and regret ended with something rare. Two hearts that didn't just find love, but redefined it. Because sometimes love isn't about who you start with. It's about who stays when the world falls quiet.